Good evening. I'm Char Glacy, Chapter Chair of the San Diego Chapter of the Explorers Club, and I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. As COVID restrictions prevent us from meeting in person at this time, we wanted to reach out to our members and chapter supporters with some interesting presentations. And tonight is no exception, as we have with us Richard Garriott, the newly elected president of the Explorers Club. At the end of tonight's presentation, we will have time for some questions, so please make use of the Zoom Q&A feature. I'd like to introduce Explorers Club Fellow and Medalist, David Dolan, our Vice Chair of Programs, who will introduce Richard. David?
Sure, and thank you for organizing this. I also want to add my welcome to the members of the Southern California chapter and as well as San Diego chapter to this event. This is the first public event beyond the annual meeting for Richard Garriott to be with chapters. And we're excited that you decided to come to California for this trip, although virtually, but we want you to know you're most welcome to come with your family anytime. We have lots of ways to keep your kids very entertained between zoos and Disneyland and everything in between, mountains and oceans, and you can go skiing and surfing the same day in our neighborhood. So do come see us. You know, I'm not a big believer in big introductions. All of you have received the announcement of Richard's background. As you know, he just was elected president this year of the Explorers Club, taking over the reins from Richard Reese, who joined us just a few months ago for one of these sessions. And Richard Garriott's no stranger to the Explorers Club. He's been a member for decades. We actually served on the board together a while back. And, but you know, Richard never came across to me as somebody really gregarious or really talking about himself. He just gets things done, period. And whether it's creating one of the best selling virtual live games on the planet, I guess that would be the universe as far as we know, but also being the first father and son with his father, astronauts of Americans. He has not just flown in space, he's a space aficionado. He could probably tell you about anything about space because, frankly, as a child of an astronaut, NASA astronaut, he grew up with the astronauts. That's in his blood. And I know he has lots of stories to tell about that. I hope you tell us about, for example, the Challenger Educational Center you helped found during your talk. You also have taken a very notable fictional but real life characters' ashes to space. That has something to do with Star Trek, which inspired me, but we want to hear about that. Maybe you can tell us also about the different, when you come to ECAD, you're always you and your family are representing different parts of the world and sometimes different species. And then we want to hear also about the adventures your kids have. We don't want to just hear about you, Richard. We want to hear about these kids who are the youngest ever to the North Pole and other places. So we have a lot to learn about. There's a lot about things that Richard, you can learn by looking at his bio of Wikipedia. If you dig deep enough, you find out that he, as a younger person, he was into Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings and even fencing. So the guy comes from every which background. I guess after reading your background, I guess the last time I read a bio like that, it was Leonardo da Vinci. So Richard, you must be Leonardo reincarnated. In any case, we welcome you as the new president of Explorers Club, and we are excited about the leadership you will bring.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Shar. By the way, that was a very kind introduction, David, and very, very thorough. And I hope we get to at least half of those stories because those are all things I very much enjoy. And so you might have seen me reaching around to pull little things to show off to illustrate the stories you just asked about. But also just hello to everybody who's joining us here today. There's actually three things fundamentally that we'd like to talk about, or I'd like to talk about today. One is the Explorers Club itself. I'll talk about that first. Then I figured second, we'll talk about this most recent expedition I returned from, which is down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench aboard the submersible limiting factor, which those of you who follow submersible activities know that's the third submarine now that has been able to reach that depth, and the first one that can make full ocean depth dives repeatedly. And then I'll circle back on the one that I could talk forever about, the big one, which is my trip to space that I made in 2008. And also how the Explorers Club, when I get to that one, I'd like to talk about how I think the Explorers Club itself is really significantly responsible for, frankly, the existence of commercial spaceflight, and definitely the fact that I managed to go myself. So to dive in on those, to first talk about the club. First of all, when I joined this club in the 90s, I had to work hard to figure out a way to express my resume in a way that would be accepted as a member of this club. But then once I got in, I found the amazing fellowship of like-minded explorers that we are, and immediately was able to not only deepen my actual exploration activities, but also to really help build and grow a variety of exploration capabilities. I partnered with other members of the club to help build companies like Deep Ocean Expeditions that chartered the Mir submersibles to go down to Titanic and other targets, to help build Adventure Networks International to go do meteorite hunts in Antarctica, and to help do things like Zero G Corp, the Space Adventures, and the X Prize that helped kind of usher in this new commercial era of spaceflight we're in right now. And so I really feel like I owe a huge debt to the club itself and to our fellowship of members to not only have allowed me to do what I've done, but also to have helped raise entire industries out of nothing. And so as David knows, I since we shared a lot of time on the board, I spent the full 3 tours you were allowed to serve on the board. Most recently, I was the Vice President of Development. I was one of the chief negotiators on the Discovery partnership that we now have going. And I'm very obviously pleased to be following it up now and have been elected as the president. Although I'm happy to point out the fact to people that, for this is the first time, or maybe last time was the first time to run for president, you have to actually have submitted a variety of new paperwork that you didn't used to have to do, and go through background checks and go through all these other pieces, all this other lengthy multi-month process to even be on the on the ticket. And I'm the only one that made it through that bothered to go all the way through that whole sort. So I was actually the board had exactly a choice of one, and that was me. And so I'm not sure if other people were just too intimidated to run against me or weren't foolhardy enough to go through the full process. But either way, I'm the one you get. And I do really hope to serve you all very well. And by now you've probably or hopefully seen the letter that I sent out prior to the membership meeting and prior to the board meeting, where I sort of outlined what I hope, or at least would be the initial set of goals that I hope that we'll accomplish here in my tenure. Those are, first of all, remembering that we are a member organization, that anything the management and leadership of this club does should be measured against how does this benefit the members who we represent. Secondly, is to continue our extremely successful, I would say, push for diversity. We now have had under Richard Wies's leadership a board that is at least 50% women. And represents diversity much better than we ever had in previous boards that I'm familiar with. And if you see things like the Explorers Club 50, which is fascinating to see just how amazingly successful it's been at a wide number of levels. I mean, our partners love it, our financial backers love it, Our members love it. Our media partners love it. And one of the reasons I think it was so successful is that while most of our big awards we often give out to the people who have been in exploration the longest and have achieved the most, which also has historically made them the least diverse, by focusing specifically on younger people and specifically on global as opposed to America centric, you immediately get a much the side effect of that is you get more diversity in all senses of the word diversity. Diversity in fields of exploration, diversity in ethnicity and gender, diversity in cultural backgrounds, religions, and languages. And all these things I think are really greatly beneficial to our club. And what I asked actually in the board meeting following the member meeting, I gave a specific request on this to all of our board members, all of our vice presidents, and all of our committee chairs to say, just like we've done with the Explorers Club 50, I want everybody to be thinking about in our leadership succession planning to not only know who you have two kinds of people prepared to be your successors. One is the person you know well that you may have been working with and is kind of naturally rising up under your tutelage to take over, hopefully. But also make sure that you have put the word out that whatever your committee or vice presidency does, that you make sure that everyone in all the members of our organization know that we are an open door place, that we encourage them to step up and speak out. And if they wish to participate in club leadership and help guide this club, we need them and we want them and we will help promote them. And so I think that's, to me, that's sort of the next step of how we will succeed in diversity as a club. The third thing I talked about there was building on the momentum of some of our partnerships, like the Discovery partnership. Discovery has proven to be a great partner, not only providing, last year, hundreds of thousands of dollars, about $500,000 worth of grants. We hope to push that closer to $1 million this year, and Discovery would be happy to go past $1 million if we could find that many worthy projects for them to match their criteria to help fund. But also that partnership has lifted our brand value. And interestingly, while COVID has been a real tragedy for the world, it has forced us all to start doing things like this online more. And that turns out to have some benefit. It lets us all be together when we're not. And it also lets, when we do lecture series, as opposed to filling a room with 200 explorers who happen to be able to find their way to New York, we now reach naturally thousands of people with a lot of our lectures. And if Discovery promotes one of our lectures, we've gotten up to 100,000 people to view some of our lectures. And so we're going from hundreds to hundreds of thousands. That is 1,000-fold increase in the viewership of some of the things that we do. And that means that one of our other pillars of our existence is public outreach. Our public outreach capability has just gone up, dramatically. And so we want to really use this growth of our brand value, this growth of our reach, to help us do things like bring in additional partnerships and brands, and ultimately help us fundraise directly into the organization to set up endowments for all these grants that we're doing, endowments to keep the building and our artifacts preserved, and hopefully set the club up very well for the future. And the last piece that I put on there is good governance. I actually think that we've been, over the 10 years or so that I've been involved in leadership, I think our governance has steadily gotten better. If you ask me, I know people have varying opinions as what defines good governance. It depends on how much you agree with what's going on, I presume. But making sure that we are extremely open and transparent and communicative about how we are structured, how we make decisions, and what those decisions were, and what the criteria going into them were, then I think that gives people faith and confidence in that good governance. And I think that is beneficial to all the other things we're talking about, including, for example, raising money. I mean, if you're going to give a lot of money to an organization, you want to make sure that it be well managed. And so these, I think, all play together. And so in any case, that's sort of my spiel on the club itself and what I'm hoping to do here in my role. One more detail, I'll say that before I move on to deep dives, is fireside chats. I mean, we used to have a quarterly president's report that would go out in writing. We've recently moved that to a presidential video report, which I find to be a superior method myself. I enjoy those. You get a little more, seems a little more personal. But I'm going to push that to another level, which is to actually do live interactive fireside chats. And so about 2 weeks after any board meeting, it's my intention to host a fireside chat where I'll present a summary of the board meeting. I'll usually have a guest who will be with me to help talk about the issue du jour. It might be, for example, the fact that the construction is still going on at the headquarters. To talk about that might be a topic as an example, and then open it up to the floor for Q&A. So we're actually targeting the 20th of this month. So just a week more away is when I'm targeting my first fireside chat. We don't have that formally scheduled yet, but that's at least kind of put a pin in that date if you're interested. And I actually said I wasn't going to present slides, but as I've been, just as we were about to go live, I was noodling on some slides I have here of the deep dive. And so I actually might show those. And so if you'll hang on with me for a second, I am going to talk about this trip that I recently went on by sharing this screen. There we go. So, for those of you who don't know, it was literally just about a month ago. In fact, I was down on March 1st. I joined Victor Vescovo, who, by the way, is our Explorers Club medalist from the year 2020. But since we didn't have an ECAD, I actually took his medal with me and I presented it to him at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So where now I've been once, but he's been like more than a dozen times himself in this vehicle, which is called Limiting Factor. And most of you are probably familiar with our dear friend Don Walsh, who went. Oops, sorry, wrong side. Our dear friend Don Walsh, who went down in the Trieste, which is kind of hiding behind some of my notes there. He went down, the year before I was born, as him and Jacques Picard down to the first people down. James Cameron with Deep Sea Challenger, which I understand you guys had a lecture from a few years back, after he had just come back from the Mariana Trench. He was also the second person or the third person, second vehicle that made it down there. And now this vehicle that Victor Vescovo built is the third vehicle that's been able to go that deep. I know you've already been told a little bit about me, but since in the slides, I'm this kind of weird combination of explorer and creator. David was mentioning some of the games that I have been involved in making. I think that I get that from the fact that I had an astronaut as a father and an artist as a mother, and that led me into high-tech art, the classic STEAM out of STEM. And so I think that the best example of a high-tech art is video games. And so no surprise, I was one of the first ever developers of video games. I made them over the last 45 years, starting with really the beginning of that entire industry. The word avatar comes from my games. The category of massively multiplayer games comes from my games. And the whole time I was doing that, I was also already being an explorer. But this was sort of the stuff I did before being a member. And and like I said, it was a bit of a stretch as to whether it's exploration or a vacation for me. I went down the Amazon and tracked mountain gorillas and things before it was easy. This was before the internet, before you could do, so it wasn't exactly, you couldn't really do it at a travel agent, but it wasn't, I still, had lots of help, shall we say. But then as soon as I became a member of the Explorers Club, I began to explore much more extreme locations and help build a lot of the companies that would take us those places. And then ultimately, in fact, this particular slide deck has some space in here first. So I'll mention a little bit of space here, and I'll still circle back to space. But it really was the work that I had done building computer game companies, building and selling game companies over and over again, that helped me then figure out how to open up commercial space. And it was when I was a teenager that one of the NASA doctors told me that because I needed glasses, I was not eligible to be a NASA astronaut. And having grown up around all these astronauts, I was crushed because every adult I knew was involved in putting people into space. And so I sort of thought it was everybody's manifest destiny to go to space, and I was just kicked out. And so, I had resolved myself at a pretty young age to help open up commercial space flight, frankly, so I could go. And as soon as I started making money in video games, I immediately began investing in opening up commercial space companies. And probably the biggest step was when we, in the 90s, was right about the time I joined the Explorers Club, we founded something called the X Prize, where we put together a $10 million prize for the first vehicle to fly into space. That prize was won in 2004 by Burt Rutan of Scaled Composites. That vehicle, Spaceship One, now hangs in the Smithsonian. And a few years later is when I actually managed to make my little off-planet journey. And even though I paid my way, and so people often try to use the words space tourist when they talk about me and people like me, I am not a fan of that term in its use towards me, although there are others who are very happy with that term because that's what they think they did, is tourism. You know, in my case, I built the company and I took on an extremely heavy scientific and a commercial workload to try to not only offset the incredibly expensive ticket price I had to pay to get there, but also to try to find research and business activities that would pay for future flights into space. And so one of those, as an example, was I did something called protein crystal growth, where a lot of these, if you're trying to determine the structure of proteins are very complicated molecules. They don't crystallize very easily, and convection currents in the medium which is crystallizing tends to disrupt the growth of the crystal, makes it hard to image. And so if you grow those in space, where there's no gravity, therefore no convection currents, you can get bigger crystals. And I took both known and unknown proteins, successfully crystallized lots of them. We've actually repeated this experiment now numerous times in space, and there are people now further commercializing it. Another thing I've done through all my different trips, including my most recent one, is looking for extremophiles. I've gone looking at first at hydrothermal vents, then in polar ice, then in volcanic vents, then in Antarctic ice. Actually, Antarctic ice was second, but really everywhere I go, and that includes the trip that we just made down to the Mariana Trench, and I know you all know where it is. They're south of Guam, and so this is this part. I think most of you know that the thing that makes the Mariana Trench so deep is the subduction zone between the Pacific Plate and the Philippine Plate. One of our objectives was actually to pick up rocks from both plates. We actually did not meet that objective. I'll describe why in a second. We had some difficulties with the sub. Any of you that have not read up on Victor's amazing hardware, it includes this research vessel pressure drop with a crew of about 35 to operate both the ship and the submersible. Limiting factor is an amazing piece. It's a 10-ton piece of hardware, which actually compared to, say, the Mir submersibles, which is this orange one here behind me, those are 25 tons. And so it's actually half the weight and probably half the size of the Mirs. So it's a relatively small and nimble little device that has the living quarters, the non-pressurized portion, the 1 atmosphere portion, is about 1.4 meters wide on the interior. It actually shrinks by about half a centimeter due to the pressure, despite the fact that it's 9 centimeters thick of titanium. For those of you who know submersibles, you know that on the interior of that sphere is just where the 2-person crew sits, and your life support like oxygen and CO2 scrubbing go. All the batteries and thrusters and syntactic foam for flotation, sonar, communications, everything else is on the outside, exposed to the full ocean pressure. The viewports on that, you can see they're gigantic. They're almost 2 feet across on the front to get a 4-inch window on the interior, and that 4-inch window also pushes inward by about a half a centimeter, also independent of the crushing of the whole sphere. I think this is just hilarious. When I think of the projects that I do myself in my garage, and I imagine building these amazing things, they all have very humble beginnings. And this is the humble beginnings of the pressure sphere of limiting factor, where they literally take out a block of styrofoam out behind their hangar, and they use literally an employee's 10-speed bike turned upside down to spin that foam block, where they then use, a hand router on a jig to carve it into that hemisphere. And what's interesting about that is they made 2 of those hemispheres and then hardened them with a coating, and they sent those to Victor's house. And he actually, they mounted the chairs in it, they mounted the flat panel displays in it, and they did all the software for the operations of the submarines were done in that kind of styrofoam hemisphere. Then once they had that all done, they had to go forge this thing out of the 9 centimeters worth of titanium that I mentioned. And I'm only going to show you a few seconds of this. You can find this video on the internet. But this is the gigantic press they use to mash 9 centimeters thick of red hot titanium into each of the 2 halves of this amazing protective shell that you ride to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in, or anywhere fellowship depth you want to go. And so that slug has been heating, for days in a kiln to get the titanium up to that temperature. And then bring it over to a press. Anything like oil or any other foreign materials that are anywhere near this are immediately, set on fire as this press goes down. And just think of the enormous forces involved in just making half of this titanium sphere that you will then live inside of as you dive into the deep. And they make 2 halves of that, and those 2 halves then are what you kind of live inside of for 12 hours at a time. Let's see, just a couple more minutes here just to show how that bowl looks, the titanium bowl. And of course, that's it rough shaped. They will then go and hone that down with precision and make the penetrations necessary to go. But in addition to the main submersible, there's also these landers, these 3 landers that you drop off the back, and they become not only navigation points underwater that you can ping with sonar, but they also have, that's actually where most of your experiments actually go on the landers. The submarine comes over to look at them, but most of the mud sampling, life sampling, water sampling, all that is done primarily on the landers. There is a robotic arm on the submarine itself, but we had some difficulty with that, as I mentioned. But when the submarine goes over the edge, it does take you 4 hours sinking like a stone to get to the bottom. When you do, we purposely sort of land in a flat, nondescript area to make sure you just don't bump into things. And also you want to make sure you got to the deepest point. So we start there. But then we begin to traverse, and there is a lot of contour down there. But all of it is covered in this pretty heavy silting. And so to see much mineralization or bacterial mats or other things we're looking for is really quite hard because everything's so covered in this talcum powder-like dust. You do, however, unfortunately see plenty of plastic. I know you can't really see it in this image, but I can see there is a white plastic string kind of coiled from the bottom right towards the upper left. You can see a couple of coils of it about the size of your pinky on the screen. That is a 7-mile long fiber optic cable that was dropped by another research team. It is common practice right now to dump your fiber optic cables instead of rewinding them back up, which is unfortunate. We brought back up water samples, mud samples, and these amphipods that we would bait our landers and go pick them up. And we found tons and tons and tons of microplastics. On the upper right, you can see there's the leg of one of the amphipods, and you can see the scale of a piece of plastic that it's there. But you also find it in their flesh. So there's a new species that was discovered down there that they actually gave the part of its scientific name includes plasticus because it's just so rife with microplastics. So, personally, I think that global warming is probably the existential threat of our lifetimes, but microplastics are a much bigger threat, I think, than most people understand. That we now have microplastics everywhere there's water. There are microplastics. I've never been to a place we couldn't sample them, and now they're showing up in the flesh of the animals at the bottom of the food chain, and therefore it's going to be working its way up. So I think that's a real problem. There's a view out of viewport to the manipulator arm and one of the landers. Here you do see some of the things we saw down there. So little tube wormy kind of animals, the little amphipods in the upper right I was talking about. We crashed into a siphonophore, the bottom center on the way up. And the fish you see on the bottom right, I forget the name of it. That was actually found on a previous dive series, not ours. And we were looking, as I said, for these piezofiles. Right now, the samples we sent back are being looked at to see if we found any. These photographs are not from where we were. These were the samples of the targets we were looking for. But I also did a lot of educational outreach. You know, I connected to school children around the US and the UK with artwork that they sent in that I took down. And I literally just have a box sitting here on the floor next to me of things I took at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and I've stamped it with the Challenger Deep stamp, and I hand signed it, and I'm sending it back to all the kids. Similarly, in fact, we worked with a group called the National Organization for Teaching English, and they came up with a fantastic challenge, which is to have kids write a cinquain, a little 5-line, 22-syllable poem about what they imagine we might see down there in the deep. I wrote my own about here is my plastic submarine that when I was a child. I keep everything. I'm a total pack rat, so it's all glued together with super glue. So it has been since I was a kid. And you can put batteries and a motor in it, and it would tootle around in my tub. So you know, there was my cinquain. You know, once was Lego, now it's titanium, and so we had kids literally from every continent on Earth. I didn't have every continent. My wife says I cheated because once I realized I was close, I called friends in various a few other continents to make sure I could take cinquains from every continent, and read one of my favorite books down there. But another one of our members, Michael Dubno, he was also on the same dive series with me, and he has a machine shop in his basement. And so one of the things that we did is we did high pressure hydroforming. We actually carved a die in the shape of the submarine. We would bolt across the face of that a thin piece of metal, and we'd use the natural pressure of the depth of the ocean to form it around that die. And that worked. It took us a while to get it to really hold all the water out. As you might imagine, that's kind of hard. And but by the end of the dive series, we had it nailed, and so we could start making these things reliably. I also put down something called a geocache for those of you who are geocachers. We left one right there at the bottom of the deep. And after a 4-hour ride up to the surface, we now have tons of data analytics to do. And so, as I mentioned, you know, we've already found lots of plastics. The work is still ongoing for the extremophiles. I'm still in the middle of returning all the educational stuff to all the kids. I've literally been, in fact, all the stamps and things are here behind me. And I took down, another thing I like to do when I go on expeditions is I take down a pack of origami paper. And so you can see these little origami paper submarines that I'm trying to work out exactly how I'm going to fold them and stamp them, because I took the paper down with me. So now I can make a 3-dimensional object, again, as thank yous and gifts to students and teachers and other people who supported it. But now let me jump onto the third area, doing a little time check. Yeah, we're at halfway through our total time. And let me circle back on space a little bit and tell you how sort of all this stuff kind of comes together. David mentioned the Challenger Centers. And so I unpacked something that I literally already had packed in this box to go to a woman by the name of June Scobie, who was one of the founders of the Challenger Learning Centers. And so one of the common things to do on a deep submersible trip is to take things made out of styrofoam, like a coffee cup, expose it to the full ocean pressure, and return with a thimble instead. And in fact, here is my styrofoam wig head of Victor Vescovo that I made, and I'm going to be taking over the headquarters here in a minute. And there is the Michael Dubno crafted version of me, and I already gave him his Richard Garriott version of him crafted that we shrunk in the deep. But to tell you the story of the Challenger Center, you know, as I already mentioned, I grew up with my dad being an astronaut, my right-hand neighbor, Joe Engel, astronaut, left-hand neighbor, Hoot Gibson, astronaut, another astronaut literally with my back fence. And we lived, 3 blocks outside the front gates of NASA. And so all of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo era astronauts were my neighbors all the way till I went off to college. And so, my dad flew on Skylab as well as the 9th launch of the shuttle. And as most of you know, STS-25, the Challenger launch, was intended to be the first teacher in space flight. And my high school science teacher at that time was June Scobie, whose husband, Dick Scobie, was the commander of the Space Shuttle Challenger. And so when the Challenger was lost during launch, not only were school children and adults around the world watching that terrible tragedy, but it obviously hit home in my neighborhood and my school, and with friends and family, much harder than even it hit everybody. And so the families who were experiencing this, firsthand, the loved ones and direct family members of the crew, what they resolved to do is they said, hey, we need to do something to continue this educational mission, where we don't want to let this sort of be the end. What can we do to continue it? And June was there when I had, and was part of the process of me starting my career in video games. And so she knew very well that I was not only creating these big interactive, the first of their kind interactive experiences, but I was also doing live performance kind of versions of them. I was also building big haunted houses and things. I still do. And so June actually came to me and she said, look, we the families have this idea that we want to continue this. We want it to be educational. We want it to tie to schools. We don't really know what to do. Can you help us think through this? And so I actually put together the original proposal for what eventually became the Challenger Learning Centers, of which there are now 50 around the globe. What they are is they are mission simulators for kids, and they include a full-up mission control and a full-up space vehicle or base or station, and kids. It feathers directly into the curriculum in schools, where the kids apply for 2 jobs: a job in mission control and a job in space. The teachers help them sort and get their positions lined up. They then get an opportunity to travel to the simulator, where they get to play both roles. They actually run the simulator twice. One time they're in mission control and one time they're in space. And while they've all learned what their role is from beginning to end, there, of course, during the actual mission, there's lots of malfunctions that make them have to think on their feet and change the outcome, deal with the outcomes, or deal with the issues as they roll through. And at the end, they've actually collected a lot of data, which they then have to go back to their schools and go like, okay, well, if these are the measurements it came up with, how do we do the math around that? How do we do the science around that? And so it feathers back into multidisciplinary curriculum. So in any case, so Challenger Centers is something I'm very proud of. I was on their board for many, many years. I think they might even still list me now, even though I'm relatively inaccurate, other than making them tiny cups, which I was literally had this packaged up to send to June Scobie as a thank you for all the years we've spent together doing these sort of things. And just finally, just a fun aside, you saw that little book that I was reading to Victor that was called Hubert's Hair-Raising Adventure. I've taken it on every expedition I've ever been on. I made a little cup for him too. So, but in any case, David, did I cover all those stories that you had me want to hit up before we turn over to some Q&A?
Oh, I think so. I just the thing about explorers is we all have stories, and frankly, we don't have to exaggerate, because the real life adventures are so unbelievable. But having lived it and sometimes showing the scars for it, they're plenty entertaining in and of themselves. I would.
Can I throw in a thought right there, though, David,
yes.
too, since you say the scars for it? I didn't have in this slide presentation, but since I glossed over some of the getting myself into space issues, I started numerous companies to try to reach space, and the first dozen failed. Eventually, with the partner Peter Diamandis and Mike McDowell and Eric Anderson, we built the companies like Zero G, Space Adventures, and the X Prize, and that eventually opened it up. But then, when we finally got permission from the Russians to send somebody, that was in 2000 when the .com crash happened. So I had to sell that first seat that I had arranged for myself, sold it to Dennis Tito instead, who became the first private citizen to go to space. Then I circled back in 2008 to actually make my own flight. But you might remember 2008 was also the real estate crash in the United States market. So as I paid tens of millions of dollars to Russia to be able to take this flight, I also went simultaneously broke and barely managed to make that final payment to allow me to go. And then after I had given them all my money, they found a medical disqualifying condition. I actually had your liver normally has 6 lobes. A lobe is defined by an artery that feeds it and a vein that drains it. I was missing one vein. So I had one lobe of my liver, which was a dead end blockage, which on Earth is irrelevant. But if you're in a spacecraft that has a depressurization event, that could represent a higher chance of internal bleeding, which you can't know or fix, so it'd be fatal. And so they literally, I got a call saying, by the way, thank you for your money, you're off the flight. And that was like the worst day you could possibly imagine as anybody, much less an explorer. And fortunately, I got a call a couple hours later from my medical team saying, we have a plan, and that is that on Monday morning, you're in the hospital and we take out that chunk of your liver. You'll be fine with 5 lobes. And so I have a scar now from my sternum down to my belly button over to the side of my body. And I know a lot of us have a few scars of in our chest cavities these days. But that one was mine for sort of my memento for getting cleared to fly into space.
I have to say, your scar is far more impressive than mine. I was very disappointed when I came home from my double lung transplant. I was hoping to have these big gnarly scars, and my lung thoracic surgeon made 2 dainty little slits in between one set of ribs on one side and the other side. And when I showed my scars to my doctor neighbor, he says, "Oh, it looks like you had breast reduction." So you have outdone me, Richard, of course. I have a quick question before we go to some others. I heard some sort of rumor about debate whether or not you ought to climb Mount Everest right away or maybe delay that. Could you explain that?
So what's funny is, first of all, let me give you a preamble, which is that I have grown to be a huge Victor Vescovo fan. He literally is. He has done more for exploration by the creation of this vehicle than almost anyone I can think of, and his willingness to share this with the world and take others along on this journey is profound and amazing. And the way he's letting a lot of folks participate, including myself, is he's saying, look, I want to be able to take, when we go down to the Mariana Trench, I want to be able to take researchers from the Mariana Islands down there, but they can't, even their government can't afford to do that. And so I'm going to get some of my explorer buddies to come along and kind of do a 2-for-1 cost thing where we all help sponsor not only the cost of ourselves going, but also a researcher to follow on after us. And in that way, he's taken a couple dozen of us down to these deepest points in the ocean, but also a few dozen more researchers, both down and on board the ship, who represent not only the pinnacles of their exploration fields, but also the regional areas where these targets are. Again, help really democratizing and spreading out this knowledge globally. So huge kudos to Victor. But it is actually funny though that as all of us as explorers, we all want to do some things first. And so one of the things Victor asked me is he said, hey, you've already been to space and I'm going to take you down to the deep in my vehicle. Please don't go climb Mount Everest right away because I want to do those 2. I mean, he's already done Everest. He now wants to go to space. So he wants to take one of these commercial flights that's now opening up to go to space before I go climb Everest. And I told him, by the way, that is really safe because I have absolutely no inclination of climbing Everest, until I can build myself a machine that will claw its way up there with me inside it in comfort. And I tried to tell him my machine climbing idea, and he said, no, that won't work. So, but anyway, his first to space before I climb Everest is safe, just because I really have no intention.
Let me ask one last question before we go with Charles with some of the public questions. And that is, you talked about from your gaming experience, you created this whole concept of Avatar, which of course we all know that James Cameron's taken that to the next level to make, he's making sequels now to his first Avatar movie. Are there any plans to make movies out of the games you had created? Because that seems to be a natural.
Yeah, sadly, no. And unfortunately now that original series is both old enough and owned by, 2 companies of mine back to where I wouldn't have the ability to influence that very much. And the reason why I say sadly is because I actually think that most movies made about most games are terrible. And the reason why they're terrible is most games have no story value in them. They're all, games about let's go kill some things and collect some power and treasure and go kill some more things. And that's, that is not a great piece of narrative. My games are amongst the few games, especially of that time period, that really tried to tell a more socially and personally relevant context, which is why I actually came up with the term avatar, was to make you, the player, personally responsible for the good or bad deeds your character did in the game. So you couldn't just go kill everything. There was karma, effectively, that came back to you, the Earth person inhabiting that virtual body. And so my games had a much deeper storycraft than many of those. So, but no, unfortunately not.
Okay, maybe later.
Maybe.
So Richard, I just have a question about what it takes to do space travel, as an individual privately. What kind of training besides having to give up part of your liver, what kind of training did you have to go through in order to feel that you could do that?
Well, that's interesting because it's also changing. But, when I flew, or anybody that flies right now on the Soyuz, and especially if their destination is the International Space Station, either or both of those means you really need to do a lot of training. And the easiest way to think about it is, if you're going up to the International Space Station, you obviously want to survive, but you also want to make sure that you can accomplish whatever goals you have. Like that includes feeding yourself, personal hygiene, and probably some experiments to do, and maybe you phone home and get some data up and down. All that requires training, and so you have to become what's called a user level trained on every system that's aboard that vehicle. All the safety features, all the life support features, food, water, the toilets, and a cadre of experiments and communication devices. But by the way, that is really fun training. All of you would enjoy that. Everyone on this call would totally dig that. I mean, if you're a scuba diver, you can handle all the life support on a spacecraft or a submarine for that matter. If you're a ham radio operator, which many of us are, you can handle all the communications on board a spacecraft or the submarine for that matter. If you would like physics at all, you would enjoy the orbital mechanics that you probably won't need to use, but it's just cool to understand that two things orbiting the center of the Earth will collide. You can't travel around the Earth side by side because you're each orbiting the exact center and you're going around mighty fast. So you only have a few minutes before you will collide if you come close to another object in space that's simultaneously orbiting. These little moments are just cool parts of the training. The hardest part was trying to learn another language. So, сейчас я знаю русский язык чуть-чуть, русский язык это очень трудный. But so I had to. I was just saying the Russian language is very hard to learn, and I know it a very little bit. But now, like for example, if you look at the manifest for space flights, there are more fully private people going to fly in the next year than government people going to fly for the first time. So we've gone from, in the year 2000, the first private people started going. Now we have the majority of people going are now finally going privately, not government. Wow. We have the Inspiration 4 team that'll go this fall. The Axiom ISS module is taking a crew of 3 or 4. Dear Moon on Starship is probably later, but at least is manifested. We have Space Adventures is flying 2 more people on a Soyuz. The Russians are flying 2 more people, a filmmaker and an actor, on another fully private one as well. So there's 5 missions that are fully private. Wow. And so, and there's probably only 2 per year that are government.
Amazing. So let me see what questions we have. And by the way, for any of our attendees, if you'd like to ask a question, just go to the Q&A and type it in, and I'll make sure it gets to Richard or David will. So the first one is from Martha Shaw, and Martha's a member. She's part of the San Diego chapter, and she wants to know, what kind of data did you collect? And I think she's meaning when you went down in the trench.
Yeah, and so so what's interesting about collecting data at that depth is how hard it is to get there, and therefore, while in certain perspectives we brought back lots of data, I'll go through that, but it's also, boy, it is hard fought to get data out of there. When you think that submarine, that titanium sphere is very well made. You are very safe down there at that depth. But all the equipment that's on the outside, sonar, manipulator arms, batteries, thrusters, those are all things you buy. They didn't build them all from scratch, and they're sold to you as will operate at full ocean depth, but no one before has ever used them repeatedly at full ocean depth. And so guess what? They find out that it's actually pretty hard to keep that stuff, in proper operational nick while it's down at those pressures. And so this is still an experiment that is being refined. And so there's interesting, even little things like the ability to communicate is with acoustic phones down at that depth. But this is the farthest, deepest, highest pressures, most temperature extremes any of these things have ever worked. And so it's the data rates by voice or your little text messages you can back it up are very slow. And so there's a lot of, to analyze that or to help improve it, or to even know, for example, how deep am I actually, is a really complicated set of mathematics. And so one of the things we were collecting, and we were sharing actually with some people, some bloggers, Matt Parker is a mathematics blogger who we were sharing some of this data with about, as you go down, there's the pressure. That is a reasonably good, a loose indicator of depth. In fact, you have your depth gauge usually is cued to pressure. However, that's not that accurate because it turns out that the temperature of the water will change its density. It turns out that even though water is non-compressible, generally speaking, that at those kind of phenomenal pressures, even that changes the density of the water. The salinity of the water changes the density of the water. And all those things change with depth. And so every time we go down, all three landers are measuring this data constantly as they fall. The submarine is measuring this data as it goes down. We're bouncing sonar off all the different things and measuring the timing for all those things. And all that data gets sent back up to where we go like, okay, we think we went down to specifically 10,925 meters, but we actually still don't know if that's an accurate statement. That number crunching is literally from a month ago still going on to even know what depth did we actually reach. And then even then there's debate. People can debate like, did you properly measure the gravitational constant of the Earth at that particular point, which turns out to probably be pretty negligible. But all these things are factors, and people debate how heavy those factors are. But we also measured, like I had mentioned before, we were taking water samples at every level to look mostly for microplastics. We took samples of life, mostly at the bottom, of course, mostly the amphipods. One thing this submarine does not yet have is a little suction cup, a little suction device that, for example, they often have on the mirror submersibles to suck up some of these deep sea creatures. So most of the deep sea creatures, that other kinds of life other than the amphipods, which walk into our traps, the other things that would require you to suck them up, they've only been found with dredging. They've only been brought to the surface with dredging. We're still doing the research on the extremophiles. We didn't, because we had trouble with the manipulator arm, we did not get the geological samples. That's still going to be for a future trip. They added from the last summer when one of our other members, Kathy Sullivan, went down. They didn't have a sample tray on the sub. They added one by the time I went down, but we just couldn't find a rock small enough and the manipulator arm wasn't usable enough to get a rock into it. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of work is still ongoing.
Very good. Martha also wants to do a little shout out for you. She feels the Challenger Learning Centers are great. So she's giving you a thumbs up on that.
Thank you, Martha.
Charles Kimona, this is a Explorers Club question having to do with our partnership with Discovery. He's wondering if you could talk a little bit about the possibilities of our partnership with Discovery.
Yeah, so I think there are at least three major components of the Discovery partnership, which I think all of us should be very excited about. The first one is grants. They literally, we put the target out there of $1 million worth of grants every year, but they've actually said that even though that's what it says in the contract, for them, it's just it's a target. They're going like, if we see a good one, we want to give out that money. And they think it's they not only want to support science and exploration, but they want to be able to share the stories of those expeditions. So to them, this is not giveaway money. This is an investment in their mind's eye, not only in science, but in their own future. And so, we're trying now. One of the other things we're doing very specifically with the way we're changing up some of the committees is we're trying to get even a faster and greater throughput of applicants onto Discovery's desk for consideration. So we want them to give away the full $1 million. So if you are looking for a grant for your expedition, please apply for a Discovery grant. And don't forget, we have a fuel rating grant, we have a Rolex grant, we have our own internal grants. And so, if you need a grant for your expedition, do it. And Discovery is going to be a big part of it, but not all of it. Second one is their kind of direct financial support of the club and its operations. They have already, in fact, they literally just a week or two ago signed off on the first very big check for refurbishment of the headquarters. And what's interesting about this is we're about to go raise money for both endowments for grants and other activities, and even for operations of the club activities. But when you do that, people are usually wanting to say, hey, I want to, I'll give you $1 million if, I get to have my name on this, that, or the other part of the building, or, a room, or whatever else it might be. There's usually you usually tie it to something. Well, what Discovery has agreed to do is do the infrastructure, which no one cares about. When nobody walks into a building and goes like, ooh, wow, how, they Google like, wow, what cool collections and all the stuff. They don't go in there and go like, wow, the electricity and water works and the internet's actually functioning. And what Discovery, when they came in there, they're going like, yeah, we get it. You guys you're never going to be able to raise money for infrastructure. And so we'll do it. And so right now the first contract is getting rid of the asbestos in the basement. And then they're going to build that out as a place for all of our collections and libraries and meeting rooms. And then they're going to work up through electrical and air conditioning and all the other kind of things the rest of the building needs. And then that way, when we go out and try to raise other money, we'll be raising it towards, hey, who wants your name on the bar or whatever place? It's the David Dolan bar there in headquarters. So come on, David, let's get our names on that bar. And so they're doing a lot of that early heavy lifting. That's 2. And the 3 is as a media partner. And this has been what's I think is really affecting our brand value and our ability to reach out in other ways. The fact that we've gone from being able to reach hundreds of people to hundreds of thousands of people with the things we send out really means that more people will know about us. It'll bring more members to us. It'll be more prestige to our brand. It'll mean that even our brand partners that we already have, like Rolex, already agree. They go, yeah, we do a calculation. We give you grants and cash based upon how much exposure it gets us as a brand. And the fact that your brand is now going up dramatically means that, yeah, we'll next cycle we'll probably negotiate with you to give you some more money. They go, that's just it's a calculation for them, and the calculation is going favorably. And so I think the Discovery partnership is going very, very well. They've been we had a discussion with them today on another couple projects that would cost a bunch of money, and they were like super excited. And so I think it'd be very difficult to imagine a better, more like-minded partner that they have turned out to be. Though I know some people had some concerns they would try to take over and do other things too, but none of that has borne out, I don't think. And so I think I don't know anybody that's been less than happy with the results so far.
Very good. I'm excited to get back to the club sometime. It's been so long since I've been at the club. It'll be really exciting to be able to go back and go up to that bar and have a drink. Lisa Sohn, and Lisa, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly.
That'd be Lisa Sone.
Sone, thank you.
Member of the Southern California chapter, and she is writing the reports for the log. And you may have seen the last one, but the one coming out is pretty exceptional. That's going to print. Lisa also has been to the Titanic, and she donated one of those little styrofoam cups that had been signed previously by Don Walsh and others and gave it to the West Coast Explorers Club annual dinner that Jim Cameron spoke at. Jim signed it. And so, and then Steve Stong, who's listening, he bought it at auction, which provided money to help support this Southern California chapter. So anyway, Lisa's an exceptional explorer. She has a great question. Why don't you read it, Sharon?
Okay, so that is very impressive, Lisa. So Lisa wants to know, Richard, what is your next big expedition dream? Or should I say plan? What haven't you done yet that you really want to do?
Well, it's fascinating that I actually never expected to be able to go down to the Mariana Trench. I mean, I obviously have had subs in my mind for a long time, but space was always really kind of my ultimate target, and still is, hands down the most amazing trip I've done. But it's actually interesting that there's something there was something very fulfilling about now having gone pole to pole and space to deep. I sort of now finally it's weird to say this, but I have, for the vast majority of my time at the club, still felt like the guy who filled out my application worrying whether people would see through my exploration credentials and not let me in. And because I've done a lot of this stuff privately, I actually still get a lot of that. People actually go, "Oh, he's a space tourist. He's not a real explorer." And so I still get some of that. That's kind of exacerbated that. But now that I now sort of feel like I finally can settle in and go like, "Hey, you know what? I guess I really am an explorer after all." And so so that, anyway, I'm not sure that's not directly answering your question, but to more directly answer it, I actually am a big believer. As much as I enjoy these extreme trips, which I really do, I also enjoy the backyard trips. There are amazing things to do everywhere across the surface of this planet. And so I have two more ones that I happen to be very excited about. One is one we put off due to COVID, which is to go to Pitcairn, the island where the Bounty mutineers ended up. And there's a Explorers Club group that is taking an expedition out there. Was this past summer, probably now will be 22 before that gets out there. But another one that I was very excited to join is the group that made one trip last season and now will be making a trip next January down to the southern ice of the Weddell Sea to look for Shackleton's Endurance under the ice. And that's one I happen to, the Shackleton stories were really what brought me in as an explorer. Made me so particularly excited. Other than having a parent as an explorer, that was this story that really made me, okay, I need to be going to do this. Where is there on Earth where I can participate in things like that? And so I have down on my wife's office below me, we have a library of Shackleton artifacts and books, and so I'm just super excited to be joining both. Frankly, both of those expeditions are ones I'm very excited about. But then ultimately, as an investor, I'm still investing. Our largest investment is SpaceX. I'm hoping that investment turns out to be my ticket to go be one of the first people who live on Mars and dig in the dirt and grow some crops.
Cool. I'd love to see the Shackleton. He's one of my favorites too. Anthony Mornian asks, will there be a video program of your expedition to the Marianas Trench? If so, when?
Interestingly, there is, and I don't think we haven't put it up. Maybe it's even already up on YouTube. But yeah, we actually had a film crew with us on board who made us a video that at least I have. If it's not up on YouTube yet, it will be. We weren't planning on releasing it in the commercial format, but it's a 20-minute piece, I think it is, that shows it. And if it's not up on the Richard Garriott YouTube channel, it will be soon. Also, just as a fun note, when you go there, you'll also see that in addition to science and documentary type stuff with my expeditions, with the space trip and now the sub trip, I also filmed a fictional movie. And so there is a movie on my YouTube site, or you can just Google it on YouTube, called Apogee of Fear. And it's the first science fiction movie ever made in space. Tom Cruise is not going to do it first. It already was done. And it's actually what won me my wife, because my wife, who was, when I was trying to use pickup lines like, "Hey baby, I'm from outer space," like from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and she was not interested. I did show her this movie, and the movie stars my mother. And so that's what told her that I was probably a nice guy and probably was not married. And so check out Apogee of Fear. And I filmed another movie called The Secret of Triton's Trench that we'll be putting up there too. We're in final editing right now. And so I'll have filmed the first science fiction movie at the deepest place on Earth as well.
That's fantastic. Richard, really, I think we've hit our time limit, and I would say it's 10 o'clock your time. You're probably ready to see how your daughter's doing on her iPad. And I just want to thank you so much for being part of our webinar, and for if anyone asked questions that we missed, I apologize for that, but I think we've gone over a little bit, so I think it's appropriate to let you go.
Well, no,
Let me say just a quick word too. There's a couple questions from our members that I will address personally offline, but Alex Tremonte is president of the Adventurers Club of LA, which in the past we have had joint presentations with, but of course, right now we have not done any in-person events anywhere, but he's made some very generous offers for a facility that could be very helpful, and we will pursue that. And also Steve Elkins has a question, which I want you to be able to answer,
Sure.
Richard. He asked, any thoughts how the club can support the chapters? Because you did address that on Sunday, and I think you may want to say a word too, and maybe that'd be the last word. Because
sure, it's a great way to wrap up, David. And so
let me
first of
just
all,
say thank you from this end for staying up so late. And we'll let
no
you
problem. My
close
pleasure.
out
So,
on chapters.
yeah, David and Shar, great to be with you. And by the way, I'd be happy to come back anytime. I'm going to try to actually, as you might imagine, haven't started yet. This is the first by invitation, but it's a reminder that I really want to do this with as many chapters as we can, just to at least share that first part, which is what are we doing as a club. And so it was literally number one on my list of 4 priorities for this next period is focusing on the fact that we are a member organization, and that our member organization is organized through chapters, is literally the number one that I sent out on that email. And so a big part of that there's two phases. One is the attitude to make sure that as we make a decision, we measured against that. And then part 2 is how do you implement something that makes everybody for sure know that happens. And so one way is technology. We're, again, and this is part of what Discovery is supporting, by the way, very explicitly also. Right now at our club, as David, I know you know, because you've been in headquarters quite a few times, as I have, the infrastructure there to be able to, right now anybody could do a Zoom because it's your computer on your laptop, but it's much more difficult for us we don't have what, for example, you see in all the Discovery offices, which is a conference room with a wall that is set up with video conferencing that puts you in the other facilities space, so that 2 people separated by a big distance can feel like they're in the same conference room. We're going to really start trying to build our infrastructure to where we can start erasing the distances between us with technologies like that. Secondarily, it's a piece of what we learned through the Explorers Club 50, which is it's very easy for headquarters to fall into the trap of, hey, we need speakers. Well, who's nearby and who's available and nearby to come in and stand at that lectern? But when you had to stand at the lectern, you sort of had to get them there. But now we're moving it again with technology. We're saying we don't need the speaker to be in New York, even if we do something where we host it in that building, and we may have the MC or some part of it in that building, just to because wherever your live audience is, you want to have some aspect of live performance present. But the main presenter can be wherever in the world they want to be now, especially once we have again that technological backbone. And so inviting to speak all and participate, broadcasting what happens in headquarters out to everybody, and inviting everybody to virtually be the presenter to our entire membership, using headquarters only as a technological hub, I think will help do that. especially when you couple it with the purposeful choice to make sure all decisions are measured against how does this help our individual members whose dues we're all spending.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we look forward to hosting you in person in California, and please have a great evening, and thank you so much for joining us. You can count on our support as you take our organization to the next level.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and happy to come back in person and virtually.
That'd be great. Thank you,
Okay.
Richard.
Of course.
Cheers.
Good night.
Good night.